Well, we all know that achieving success in life means staying focused on your goals, right? You can't achieve success if you're not achieving your goals. But there's lots of distractions that keep us from doing that, right? It's hard to make progress on our goals because often we are pulled away by distractions. In fact, it may seem like everything conspires against you to knock you off course. And that's why we developed this 6-week message series called Focus. Removing distractions and staying focused on what matters most, like your faith, your family, and the people around you who need your help, that will allow you to come to the end of your life and look back with joy and satisfaction and without regret. So over the course of this series, we're looking at some of the most common distractions we all face and offering a few practical suggestions to overcome them that come straight out of the Bible. 2 weeks ago, when we started this series, we looked at the most dangerous distraction of all, greed. We said that greed and the intense desire for more wealth is a temptation that distracts most Americans, according to studies. And the key to overcoming the constant allure of more money and possessions is knowing when enough is enough. And so we suggested a couple of practical things that you could do, like decluttering your house or eliminating luxury spending, temporarily for a month or two, just to kind of recalibrate where your sense of true contentment really is. Then last week, we explored another distraction, a very common one. We looked at the distraction of leisure. The many slothful pleasures of life can tempt us away from the good but hard work that we have to do, right? The things we know we should be doing. And we're not just talking about recreation and rest, all that's good. We're talking about leisure for leisure's sake, if that makes sense. Because leisure for leisure's sake risks distracting us from the special purpose that God has given to each one of us. And we said last week that the best way to overcome that distraction is through the opposite of leisure, acts of service. Helping others, giving generously to people in need, or volunteering for a ministry or a mission here at church or for some other organization. And last week we had Father Zawadi, who told you about one great way that you could help the missions, and you all were so very generous. Thank you for your acts of service. But the whole point is that your life is not about being a consumer, right? You're not here to consume leisure and pleasure and so forth. God put you on earth to be a producer, a faithful steward, as Jesus called it last week in the gospel, a faithful steward of God's resources, helping the poor and the poor in spirit whenever and wherever you can. So those are the first two distractions, greed, money, wealth, and leisure. Now today we turn our attention to yet another distraction. And this distraction is also very common, and when you're in it, it can be all-consuming. And we're talking about the distraction of conflict. Those times when we disagree with or feel anger towards someone who has a different opinion from us or who has hurt us in some way and created a conflict. Conflict can be so distracting that Jesus warns his disciples about it in the gospel today. He wants them to be really clear that they're going to face conflict, and he wants them to be ready for it. And so he begins with a rather startling statement. He says, "I have come to set the earth on fire, and how I wish it were already blazing." And that's a little unsettling because fire, most of the time, is sort of a symbol of destruction and damage. Think of the wildfires in California. But in the Bible, fire is often a symbol for something good. It's a symbol for God's Spirit. You might remember at Pentecost when the original apostles, the first 12 followers of Jesus, experienced the Holy Spirit coming down on them. And the Holy Spirit came down on the apostles like tongues of fire. It was a kind of a baptism or an initiation. And after that, those 12 people went out into the world and they changed the course of human history. And so when Jesus says he wants to set the earth on fire, it's a good thing. But then in the very next sentence, he says something equally confusing. He points to a roadblock, and it's a big one. He says, "There is a baptism with which I must be baptized. And how great is my anguish until it's accomplished." So that's a little confusing, right? So first Jesus says fire is good, and now he's saying, he's suggesting that baptism, which seems like a good thing, is something that he's in anguish over. What does he mean? Well, here he's using the word baptism in a little different way. It means something different. The baptism Jesus is referring to is his crucifixion and death. You see, wherever he went, Jesus faced conflict. If he wasn't being criticized for healing on the Sabbath, the religious authorities of his day were carping at him about a whole bunch of other stuff, like overlooking the required ritual washings before meals, or generally running around with a pretty rough crowd of tax collectors and fishermen and unmarried women. And as his ministry and his followers grew, so did the criticisms. And ultimately, his critics turned a mob against him, which led to his death on the cross. And that's why Jesus then says, "Do you think I've come to establish peace on earth? No, I tell you, not peace, but rather division, conflict." But he doesn't mean that he's intentionally creating conflict or that he wants it. But he knows that there will be divisions and conflict between those who accept him and his message and those who reject him and his message. And those conflicts will be so deep that they divide families. And that has been very true throughout the history of the church. Jesus was warning his disciples that just like the prophets before them, like Jeremiah in the first reading that we heard today, he was lowered down into that muddy cistern. That was just part of his troubles. He faced all kinds of persecutions, and what Jesus is telling his apostles is that they're going to face that same thing, that they're confronting a sometimes hostile world. It's also why Paul in the second reading reminds us that Christ endured such opposition from sinners, because he was trying to encourage the early Christians. They also had to contend with a lot of hostility and resistance to the faith. Now, the problem for us today in our generation is that this kind of conflict, we face all kinds of conflict, right? And when we do, it can be all-consuming. And it can keep us from doing what we were put on earth to do. Indeed, conflict is a huge distraction for most people. I mean, think back to your last conflict with someone. Maybe it was this morning or yesterday. It happens all the time, right? How often have you had that unpleasant encounter with someone? It might be a family member, a friend at school or work, or it could be a stranger. But and when that happens, right, if you're like me, it just sticks in your brain, right, for hours. You can't get it out of your head for hours, days, even weeks later sometimes. Like the other person is somehow renting space in your head. And if you're like me also, you'll ruminate on it, go over and over the encounter in your brain, and think of all those great comebacks that you could have said but didn't think of at the time. I do that all the time. Unresolved conflict can create bad effects, harsh feelings, the desire to take revenge. And those feelings can be so powerful that they can consume your every thought. They can occupy every waking moment. And they can crowd out the light within us. It's sort of like the dark side in Star Wars, Darth Vader, Darth Maul, the evil emperor. Those people were powerful. But they were so consumed with hate and greed and conflict, negative qualities, that there was little hope that they would use their power for the good that God intended. And that's the problem with us. If we focus on the conflicts in our lives and not what we're supposed to be doing, then we're going to crowd out the light. And according to all the research that is out there, we are one of the most conflicted nations in the world. When it comes to social unity, the Pew Research Forum found that a large majority of Americans say there are political, racial, and ethnic conflicts in our country that are so strong that most people can't even agree on basic facts. These conflicts are so deep that they influence what we're afraid of. And enormous media empires on both sides of the political spectrum, you know what I'm talking about, have been built by constantly telling people that they are victims and that their fears are reality. It's information siloing, and it only serves to make us a more and more conflicted and stressed out nation. Researchers at Northwestern University Medical School found that the mental and psychological toll of everyday TV news consumption can be so serious that they gave it an official medical title. They called it headline stress disorder. Do you have headline stress disorder? I know I do. If I read one more monkeypox headline, I might never leave my room again. So what is it that we're so nervous about? Why does the news prey on our fears? It's because we're nervous about all the conflicts around us. The wars, the riots, the protests, the murders, the political instability, the list goes on and on. And it's not only distracting, it's also addicting and dangerous. And I don't say that lightly because I know this from personal experience. In the last 5 years of her life, my own mother, whom I adored, sat in front of the television and consumed news and talk shows for up to 10 to 12 hours a day. And I'll spare you the details, but I honestly believe that it was a contributing factor to her premature death. Now, of course, conflict can be necessary. Conflict can be good. There can be good things from conflict. It can remove our blind spots. It can make us more self-aware. It can improve our relationships with people when it's handled well. But unfortunately, more often than not, conflict just sucks our energy and our time right out of us. Needless, chronic conflict can have really negative effects like emotional strain, mental breakdowns. It can crush our souls. It can cause negative physical effects. I mean, I'm not doing that preacher over-exaggeration thing. I'm telling you, I have seen people with this. I know people right now who are suffering this because of the conflicts in their lives. Suffice it to say that conflict, whether we avoid it like the plague or somehow have become embroiled in it, has the potential to become a major distraction in our lives and divert us from doing and focusing on what's really important. And of course, conflict or fear of it can dissuade us from engaging with our faith in ways that we know we should, right? Like sharing our faith with other people, but oh no, we don't want to get in a conflict. Or standing up for the truth and what we know is right, but no, I don't want to get into a conflict. And that's why Jesus warned his disciples about conflict. He didn't want them to be pulled off course. He didn't want them to be afraid. He wanted them to know what was happening. So to help you, maybe if you're a little conflict averse like I am, or if you tend to get drawn into the drama of everybody else's conflict, we've come up with a few pieces of advice that might help extricate yourself from those sticky situations or liberate yourself from being sidetracked by necessary dysfunctional and unnecessary conflict. So a few pieces of advice, and we've developed an acronym around it called FREE, like you're freeing yourself of conflict. So each letter stands for a specific piece of advice. So first of all, the F in FREE stands for fix your eyes on Jesus. That's what St. Paul said in the second reading as he was warning his readers about conflict. Fix your eyes on Jesus and keep them there. If you sense turmoil brewing around you, somebody's drama is trying to drag you, trying to be dragged into somebody's drama, don't look around at the commotion, just keep moving ahead. If it's not your battle, if it would serve no purpose, press on and persevere in running the race that lies before you. Fix your eyes on Jesus. Second, the R stands for resolve genuine conflicts. So there are times in your life where there will be genuine conflicts, and a genuine conflict is something that I think is something that keeps you from achieving the goal that God wants you to achieve. There's a conflict in the way. It's like a roadblock, a speed bump, and you have to deal with it. So you've got to resolve genuine conflict. And if you need some specific advice on how to do that in a Christian good way, we had a message series back in January called Mind the Gap. It was 6 weeks or 5 weeks, I think, on all different techniques and so forth to resolve conflict in a healthy and productive way. And it's all on our website, on the messages page of our website. You can binge watch it tonight if you'd like. Third, the E in free stands for exit pointless conflict. If you're already engaged in a brouhaha and it's serving no purpose, then just politely bow out. Go on your merry way. I remember once witnessing a confrontation between two church people. They were lectors. Lectors are the people who read here on Sunday. And they got into a confrontation, and I was present there. And you know what it was about? It was about where the ribbon should be. And it escalated to the point where I should have just followed my own advice and exit the situation. All right, number 4 and last one on free. Escape the noise, right? If you want to either deal with conflict in a healthy way or avoid bad conflict, you've got to be a person of peace. You've got to have internal peace. And the only way you can get that is if you find some quiet time to rest and escape the noise. Without a sense of internal peace, you'll be drawn in to conflict easily, and it probably won't go well. So, last piece of advice is find a time, a place, and a practice every day to get some quiet time. It could be early in the morning or late at night. It could be in the corner of your room. You could come to our Adoration Chapel. It's open most days from 7:30 a.m. to 4 p.m., sometimes even later. Or you could just pick out a park bench, wherever you want. I talked to a dad with small children who said that the only place he can find peace, the only place that he can find sanctuary, they have two small children that had a little meltdown before they came here today. So I was telling Jackson, I said, where do you find your peace? And I didn't get an answer, but I told him the bathroom is probably the only place you can find a little peace. That's where a lot of parents of young children say, especially the dads. Anyway, if you want to be free from distracting conflicts, if you want internal peace, you have to press pause sometimes and find that quiet. And you have to do it now. If you're like me, you're always going to tell yourself that you're going to get some rest after the next deadline, after the next project is done, after the next song is written. You're going to get some rest. But no, you've got to make time now. It will not only help you see the bigger picture and avoid getting distracted by conflicts, but also savor the time you have left on earth. So that's the advice. To prevent conflicts from sidetracking you from what's important, fix your eyes on Jesus and stay there. He's the ultimate goal anyway. Resolve genuine conflicts in a healthy way. Exit unproductive, trivial battles. And finally, escape the noise to get some peace. If you practice all of these, they will free you from the dark side, and you'll stay focused on the good and the true and the beautiful.